Hello there. Thank you for clicking on this video. Your time is valuable, so we are super grateful that you are giving our little channel a chance. Any feedback is appreciated. Enjoy the story. Gulliver's Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World by Jonathan Swift. Part 2. A Voyage to Brobdingnag. Chapter 1. A great storm described, the long boat sent to the fetchwater, and the author goes with it to discover the country. He is left on shore, is seized by one of the natives and carried to a farmer's house. His reception with several accidents that happened there, a description of the inhabitants. Having been condemned by nature and fortune to active and restless life, in 2 months after my return I again left my native country, then took shipping into the Downs on the 20th day of June 1702 in the Adventure, Captain Jonathan Nicholas, a Cornishman commander bound for Surat. We had a very prosperous gale till we arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, where we landed for fresh water, but discovering a leak, we unshipped our goods and wintered there, for the captain falling sick of the ague, we could not leave the Cape till the end of March. We then set sail and had a good voyage till we passed the Straits of Madagascar, but having got northwards of that island and to above 5 degrees south latitude, the winds which in those seas are observed to blow a constant equal gale between north and west, from the beginning of December to the beginning of May, on the 19th of April began to blow with much greater violence and more westerly than usual, continuing so for 20 days together, during which time we were driven a little to the east of the Molucca Islands and about 3 degrees northward of the line, as our captain found by an observation he took on 2nd of May, at which time the wind ceased and it was perfect calm, whereas I was not a little rejoiced, but he, being a man well experienced in the navigation of those seas, bid us all prepare against a storm, which accordingly happened the day following, for the southern monsoon began to set in. Finding it was likely to overblow, we took in our sprit sail and stood by the hand to foresail, but making foul weather, we looked the guns were all fast and handled the mizzen. The ship lay very broad off, so we thought it better spooning before the sea than trying or hurling. We refit the foresail and set him, and the whole aft the foresheets. The helm was hard weather. The ship wore bravely. We belayed the fore down howe, but the sail was split, and we hauled down the yard and got the sail into the ship, and unbound all the things clear of it. It was a very fierce storm. The sea broke strange and dangerous. We hauled off upon the whipstaff and helped the men at the helm. We would not get down our topmast, but left all stand, because she succumbed before the sea very well, and we knew that the topmast being aloft, the ship was so wholesomer and made better way through the sea. When the storm was over, we set foresail and mainsail and brought the ship to. Then we set the mizzen, main the topsail and the foretopsail. Our course was east-northeast. The wind was southwest. We got the starboard tacks aboard. We cast off our weather brace and lift. We set in the lee brace and hauled forward by the weather blowings, and hauled them tight and believed them, and hauled over the mizzen trunk to windward, and kept her full and by us near as she would lie. During this storm, which was followed by a strong wind west-southwest, we were carried, by my computation, about 500 leagues to the east, so that the oldest sailor on the board could not tell in what part of the world we were. Our provisions held us well, or the ship was staunch, and our crew in all good health, but we lay in the almost distress for water. We thought it is best to hold on the same course rather than turn more northwardly, which might have brought us to the northwest part of the Great Tartary and into the frozen sea. On the 16th day of June 1703, a boy on the topmaster discovered land. On the 17th we came in full view of a great island or continent, for we knew not whether. on the south side whereof was a small neck of landing jutting out into the sea, and a creek too shallow to hold a ship of above 100 tons. We cast anchor within a leg of the creek, and our captain sent a dozen of his men, well armed, in the long boat with a vessel for water, if any could be found. I desired his leave to go with them, that I might see the country and make what discoveries I could. When we came to the land, we saw no river or springs, nor any sign of inhabitants. Our men therefore wandered on the shore to find out some fresh water near the sea, and I walked alone about a mile on the other side, where I observed the country all barren and rocky. I now began to be weary, and seeing nothing to entertain my curiosity, I returned gently down towards the creek, and the sea being full in my view, I saw our men already got into the boat and rowing for life to the ship. I was going to hollow after them, although it had been to little purpose, when I observed a huge creature walking after them into the sea as fast as he could. He waded not much deeper than his knees, and took prodigious stride. But our men had started him half a leg, and the sea, their boats, being full of sharp-pointed rocks, the monster was not able to overtake the boat. This I was afterwards taught, for I durst not stay to see the issue of the adventure, but ran as fast as I could the way I first went, and then climbed up a steep hill which gave me some perspective of the country. I found it fully cultivated, but that which first surprised me was the length of the grass, which, in those grounds that seemed to be kept for hay, was about 20 feet high. I fell into a high road, for so I took it to be, though it served to the inhabitant only as a footpath through a field of barley. Here I walked for some time, but could see little on either side, it being now near harvest, and the corn raised at least 4 feet. I was an hour walking to the end of this field, which was fenced in with a hedge of at least 120 feet high, and a tree so lofty that I could make no computation of their attitude. There was a still to pass from this field to the next. It had 4 steps and a stone to cross over when you come to the upmost. It was impossible for me to climb the stile, because every step was 6 feet high and the upper stone about 20. And I was endeavoring to find some gap into the hedge, when I discovered one of the inhabitants on the next field, advancing towards the stile, at the same size with whom I saw in the sea pursuing our boat. He appeared as tall as an ordinary spire steeple, and took about 10 yards at every stride, as near as I could guess. I was struck with the utmost fear and astonishment, and ran to hide myself in the corn, whence I saw him at the top of the stile, looking back into the next field on the right hand, and heard him calling in a voice many degrees louder than a speaker trumpet. But the noise was so high in the air that at first I certainly thought it was thunder, whereupon 7 monsters like him came towards him with ripping hooks in their hands, each hook about the largeness of 6 scythes. These people were not so well clad as the first, whose servants or labourers they seemed to be, for, upon the some words he spoke, they went to reap the corn in the fields where I lay. I kept from them as a great distance I could, but was forced to move with extreme difficulty, for the stalks of the corn were sometimes not above a foot distance, so I could hardly squeeze my body between them. However, I made shift to go forward till I came to a part of the field where the corn had been laid by the rain and wind. Here it was impossible for me to advance a step, for the stalks were interwoven that I could not creep through, and in the beards of the fallen ears so strong and pointed that they pierced through my clothes into my flesh. At the same time I heard the reapers not 100 yards behind me. Being quite despaired with toil, and wholly overcome by grief and despair, I lay down between 2 ridges, and heartily wished I might there end my days. I bemoaned my desolate widow and fatherless children. I lamented my own folly and witfulness in attempting a second voyage, against the advice of all my friends and relations. In this terrible agitation of mind, I could not forbear thinking of Lilliput, whose inhabitants look upon me as the great prodigy that ever appeared in the world, where I was able to draw an imperial flight with my hands and perform these other actions, which will be recorded forever in the chronicles of that empire, while posterity shall hardly believe them, although attested by millions. I reflected what a mortification it must prove to me to appear as inconsiderable in this nation as one single Lilliputian would be among us. But this, I conceived, was to be the least of my misfortunes, for as human creatures are observed to be more savage and cruel in proportion to their bulk, what could I expect but to be morsel in the mouth of the first among these enormous barbarians that should happen to seize me? Undoubtedly, philosophers are in the right when they tell us that nothing is greater or little otherwise than the comparison. It might have pleased fortune to have let the Lilliputians find some nation where the people were as diminutive with respect to them as they were to me. And who knows but even this prodigious race of mortals might be equally overmatched in some distant part of the world whereof we had yet to discover. Scared and confounded as I was, I could not forbear going on with these reflections, when one of the reapers, approaching with 10 yards of the ridge where I lay, made me apprehend that with the next step I should be squashed to death under his foot, or cut into two with his reaping hook. And therefore, when he was again about to move, I screamed as loud as fear could make me, whereupon the huge creature stopped short and looked around about under him for some time. At last he spied me as I lay out on the ground. He considered a while, with the caution of one who endeavours to lay hold on a small dangerous animal in such manner that it should not be able either to scratch or bite him, as myself have sometimes done with weasels in England. At length he ventured to take me behind, by the middle between his forefingers and the thumb, and brought me with 3 yards of his eyes, that he might behold my shape more perfectly. I guessed his meaning, and good fortune gave me so much presence of mind that I resolved not to struggle in the least, as he held me in the air above 6 feet from the ground, although he grievously pinched my sides for fear I should slip through his fingers. All I ventured was to raise my eyes towards the sun and place my hands together in supplicating posture, and to speak some words in humble, melancholy tone suitable to the condition I then was in. For I apprehended every moment that he would dash me against the ground, as we usually do with any little hateful animal which we have mind to destroy. But the good stars would have it that he appeared pleased with my voice and gestures, and began to look upon me as curiosity, much wondering to hear me pronounce articulated words, although he would not understand them. In the meantime, I was not able to forbear groaning and shedding tears, and turning my head towards my side, letting him know, as well as I could, how cruel I was hurt by the pressure of his thumbs and fingers. He seemed to apprehend my meaning, for, lifting up his left on his coat, he put me gently into it, and immediately ran along with me to his master, who was a substantial farmer, and the same person I had first seen in the field. The farmer having, as I supposed by their talk, received such an account of me as his servant could give him, took a piece of small straw about the size of a walking staff, and therewith lifted up the lappets of my coat, which it seemed he thought to be some kind of covering that nature had given me. He blew my hair aside to take a better view of my face. He called his hinds about him and asked them, as I afterwards learned, whether they had ever seen in the field any little creatures that resembled me. He then placed me softly on the ground upon all fours, but I got immediately up and walked slowly backwards and forwards to let those people see I had no intent to run away. They all sat down in a circle about me, the better to observe my emotions. I put off my hat and made a low bow towards the farmer. I fell on my knees and lifted up my hands and eyes and spoke several words as loudly as I could. I took a purse of gold out of my pocket and humbly presented it to him. He received it on the palm of his hand, then applied it closely to his eyes to see what it was, and afterwards turned it to several times with the point of a pin, which he took out of his sleeve, but could make nothing of it. Whereupon I made a sign that he should place his hand on the ground, and I took the purse, and I opened it, poured all the gold into his hand. There were 6 Spanish pieces of 4 pistoles each, besides 20 or 30 small coins. I saw him wet the tip of his little finger upon his tongue, and take up one of the little pieces and then another, but he seemed to be wholly ignorant what they were. He made me a sign to put them again into my purse, and the purse into my pocket, which, after offering it to him several times, I thought it best to do. The farmer, by this time, was convinced I must be a rational creature. He spoke often to me, but the sounds of his voice pierced my ears like that of a water mill. Yet his words were articulated enough. I answered as loud as I could in several languages, and he often laid his ears within 2 yards of me, but all in vain, for we were wholly unintelligible to each other. And then he sent his servant to their work, and taking his handkerchief out of his pocket, he doubled and spread it on his left hand, which he placed flat on the ground with the palm upward, making me a sign to step into it, as I could easily do, for it was not above a foot in thickness. I told it my part to obey, and for fear of falling, laid myself as full length upon the handkerchief, with the remainder of which he lapped me up to the head for further security, and in this manner carried me home to his house. There he called his wife and showed me to her, but she screamed and ran back as woman in England to the sight of a toad or a spider. However, when she had a while seen my behavior, and how well I observed the signs her husband made, she was soon reconciled, and by degree grew extremely tender of me. It was about 12 at noon, and a servant brought in dinner. It was only one substantial dish of meat, fit for the plain condition of a handyman, in a dish of about 24 feet diameter. The company were the farmer and his wife, 3 children, and an old grandmother. When they were set down, the farmer placed me at some distance from him on the table, which was 30 feet high from the floor. I was terribly frightened, and kept as far as I could from the edge, for fear of falling. The wife minced a bit of meat, then crumbled some bread on a trencher and placed it before me. I made her a low bow and took out my knife and fork and fell to eat, which gave them exceeding delight. The mistress sent her maid for a small drum cup, which it held about 2 gallons, and lifted it with drink. I took up the vessel with more difficulty in both hands, and in the most respectful manner drank to her lady's health, expressing the words as loudly as I could in English, which made the company laugh so heartily that I was almost deafened with the noise. This liquor tasted like a small cider, and was not unpleasant. Then the master made me a sign to come to his trencher side, but as I walked on the table, being in great surprise all the time, as the indulgent reader will easily conceive and excuse, I happened to stumble against a crust and fell flat on my face, but received no hurt. I got up immediately, and observing the good people to be in much concern, I took my hat, which I held under my arm out of good manners, and waved it over my head, made 3 hazes to show I had got no mischief by my fall. But advancing forward towards my master, as I shall henceforth call him, his young son, who sat next to him, an arch boy of about 10 years old, took me up by the legs and held me so high in the air that I trembled every limb. But his father snatched me from him, and at the same time gave him such a box of left ear it would have fallen in Europe troops of horse to the earth, ordering him to be taken from the table.
but being afraid the boy might own me a spite, as well remembering how mischievous all children among us naturally are at the sparrows, rabbits, young kittens, and puppy dogs, I fell on my knees and, pointing to the boy, made my master to understand, as well as I could, that I desired his son might be pardoned. The father complied, and the lad took his seat again, whereupon I went to him and kissed his hand, which my master took and made him stroke me gently with it. In the midst of dinner, my mistress' favourite cat leapt into her lap. I heard the noise behind me, like that of dozen stocking weavers at work, and turning my head, I found proceeded from the purring of that animal, who seemed to be 3 times larger than an ox, as I computed by the view of her head and one of her paws, while her mistress was feeding and stroking her. The fierceness of this creature's countenance altogether discomposed me, though I stood at the further end of the table, above 50 feet off, and although my mistress held for fear she might give a sprung and seize me in her talons. But it happened there was no danger, for the cat took not the least notice of me when my master placed me within 3 yards of her, and as I have been always taught, and found true by experience in my travels, that flying or discovering fear before a fierce animal is certain way to make it pursue or attack you. So I resolved, in this dangerous junction, to show no manners of concern. I walked with intrepidity 5 or 6 times before the very head of the cat, and within the half yards of her, whereupon she drew herself back as if she was more afraid of me. I had less apprehension concerning the dogs, where 3 or 4 came into the room, as it is usual for farmers' houses, one of which was a mastiff equal in bulk to 4 elephants, and another greyhound, somewhat taller than a mastiff, but not so large. When dinner was almost done, the nurse came in with a year-old in her arm, who immediately spied me, and began to scold that you might have heard from London Bridge to Chelsea, after the usual oratory of infant, to get me for a plaything. The mother, out of pure indulgence, took me up and put me towards the child, who presently seized me by the middle and got my head into his mouth, where I roared so loud that the urchin was frightening and let me drop, and I should infallibly have broken my neck if the mother had not held her apron under me. The nurse, to quiet her baby, made use of a rattle, which was kind of a hollow vessel filled with great stones, and fastened by a cable to the children's waist, but all in vain, so that she was forced to apply the last remedy by giving it its suck. I must confess no object ever disgusted me so much as the sight of her monstrous breast, which I cannot tell what to compare with, so as to give the curious reader an idea of its bulk, the shape, and the color. It stood prominent 6 feet, and could not be less than 16 in circumference. The nipple was about half the bigness of my head, and the hue both of that and the dog, so various was spot, pimples, and freckles, that nothing could appear more nauseous, for I had a near sight of her, she sitting down, the more convenient to give suck, and I standing on the table. This made me reflect upon the fair skin of our English ladies, who appear so beautiful to us only because they are of our own size, and their defects not to be seen but through magnifying glass, where we find by the experiment that the smoothness and the white skin look raw and coarse and ill-colored. I remember when I was at Lilliput, the complexion of these diminutive people appeared to me the fairest in the world, and talking upon this subject with a person of learning there, who was an intimate friend of mine, he said that my face appeared much fairer and smoother when he looked at me from the ground than it did upon near view, when I took him up in my hand and brought him close, which he confessed was at first a very shocking sight. He said he could discover great holes in my skin, and the stumps of my beard were 10 times stronger than the bristles of a boar, and my complexion made up of several colors altogether disagreeable. although I must beg leave to say for myself that I am as fair as most of my sex and country, and very little sunburned by all my travels. On the other hand, discoursing of the ladies in the emperor court, he used to tell me one had freckles, another too wide mouth, third too large nose, nothing of which I was able to distinguish. I confess this reflection was obvious enough, which, however, I could not forbear, lest the readers might think those vast creatures were actually deformed. For I must do them the justice to say, they are comely race of people, and particularly the future of my master's contents, although he was but a farmer, when I beheld him from the height of 6 feet, appear very well proportionate. When the dinner was done, my master went out to his labourers, and, as I could discover by his voice and gesture, gave his wife strict charge to take care of me. I was very much tired and disposed to sleep, which my mistress perceiving, she put me on her own bed and covered me with a clean white handkerchief, but larger and coarser than the mainsail of a man of war. I slept about 2 hours, and dreamed I was at home with my wife and children, which aggravated my sorrows when I woke, and found myself alone in a vast room, between 200 and 300 feet wide, and above 200 high, laying in a bed 20 yards wide. My mistress was gone about her household affairs, and had locked me. The bed was 8 yards from the floor. Some natural necessity required me to get down. I durst not perceive to call, and if I had, it would have been in vain, with such a voice as mine, at so great a distance from the room where I lay in the kitchen, where the family kept. While I was under these circumstances, 2 rats crept up the curtains, and ran smelling backwards and forwards on the bed. One of them came up almost to my face, whereupon I rose in fright, and drew out my hanger to defend myself. These horrible animals had the boldness to attack me on both sides, and one of them held his 4 feet at my collar, but I had the good fortune to rip up his belly before he could do me any mischief. He fell down at my feet, and the other, seeing the fate of his comrade, made his escape, but not without one good wound on the back, which I gave him as he fled, and made the blood run tickling from him. After this exploit, I walked gently to and from on the bed to recover breath and loss of spirits. These creatures were of the size of a large mastiff, but infinitely more nimble and fierce, so that if I had taken off my belt before I went to sleep, I must have inflammably been torn to pieces and devoured. I measured the tail of the dead rat, and found it to be 2 yards long, within an inch. But it went against my stomach to drag the carcass off the bed, where it lay still bleeding. I observed it had yet some life, but with strong slash across the neck, I throughout dispatched it. Soon after, my mistress came into the room, who, seeing me all bloody, ran and took me up in her hand. I pointed to the dead rat, smiling and making other signs to show her I was not hurt, whereat she was extremely rejoiced, calling the maid to take up the dead rat with a pair of tongs and threw it out of the window. Then she set me on the table, where I showed her my hanger all bloody, and wiping it on the lapel of my coat, returned it to the stabber. I was pressed to do one thing, which another could not do for me, and therefore I endeavoured to make my mistress understand that I desired to be set down on the floor, which after she had done, my bashfulness would not suffer me to express myself further than by pointing to the door and bowing several times. The good woman, with much difficulty, at least perceiving that I would be yet, and making me up again in her hand, walked into the garden, where she set me down. I went on the side about 200 yards, and becoming to her not to look at me or follow me, I hid myself between 2 leaves of sorrow, and there discharged the necessities of nature. I hope the gentle reader will excuse me for dwelling on these and the like particulars, which, however insignificant they may appear to the grovelling vulgar mind, yet will certainly help a philosopher to enlarge his thoughts and imagination, and apply them to the benefit of public as well as private life. which was my solo design in presenting this and other accounts of my travels to the world, wherein I have been chiefly studious of truth, without affecting any ornaments of learning or my style. But the whole scene of this voyage made so strong an impression on my mind, and is so deeply fixed in my memory, that committing it to paper, I did not omit it one material circumstance. However, upon a strict review, I blotted out several passages of less moments which were in my first copy, for fear of being censured as tedious and drifting, whereof travellers are often, perhaps not without justice, accused.